honor everybody's time. Gonna stop sharing so we can all see each other. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our 7th annual Allegany National Photography Competition Behind the Screen program. We have, for those of you who've joined us, who've never joined us before, we've done this the past few years, kind of taken a deep dive into the photography show. And our fearless leader is Associate Professor of Art, Robert Hine from Frostburg State University. So thanks so much, Robert, for always doing this for us. I want to congratulate the winners of our 7th annual show. If you missed our program last week, you can still find it on our YouTube channel at Allegheny Arts Council. Really fun time. And I just want to welcome, I see several of the invited artists for this year's show on tonight. So hi, Raphael and Sandra and Michael Hunter Thompson, and Max. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. A couple of quick housekeeping items. If you would, please just kindly put yourself on mute so that there's no distractions once we get started. There is a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a comment or you want to ask a question, Robert, I'll monitor those for you. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end if you want to ask questions of some of the artists or each other. So Robert, I'm going to share let you take over my screen here.
Okay.
And we will get going. Still have a couple folks waiting to get in, so let me let them. Well, I said I was going to let you, Robert. Having a little issue there. Okay, there we go.
All right. So I want to make sure everybody's in my screen. I'm just looking at the digital gallery. This is a really great resource for you guys to be able to just look back on the show, especially if you have work in the show, but anytime you wanted to make reference to what's in the exhibit. This is, I think, a fabulous way for us to have not just the physical space, but also this online presence, because it gives us a chance to be able to do things like this online in a virtual manner. I'm trying to move this over. There we go. And there, now I can move things down. I want to thank everybody at the top before I start to give thanks to everybody that's attending and also those that participated in the exhibit, even if you're not here in the talk. The format usually goes where I just run through the winners that are juror picked this year, Karen Irvine, and just kind of make some comments and discussion points about the winners, and then go back and mention a few that I particularly enjoyed. And then, of course, before I do that, I think it's best to then, after talk about winners, to get some questions from the group, just to kind of keep it more of an open forum and not just me talking about things the entire time. So that's the plan. Like Julie said, if you guys do have questions, please just put that in the chat and we'll definitely get to them at the end. I'll try to keep it concise, but hopefully interesting. So the way that the award ceremony worked, they started with black and white, did color, then they did the with three-dimensional, I can just put it that way. And then of course we talked about the best of show. So I'm just going to go in the same order just because the plan is already in place. And essentially starting with our black and whites, there were a lot of really great images in the show this year. I wasn't surprised with her choices for the winners, but I still like some other ones that maybe she just didn't mention. So I don't know. That's the way things go when you've got a juror. But the third place was this piece here. I got to click on view. And that was called Growing Up. The photographer is Norman, I'm not going to say it correctly, but I think it's Oraganez. It just says black and white photography, but when I went and saw the print in the gallery, it looks like it was an inkjet print. I was just trying to get more of a decisive definition on the medium, because I think if you guys are able to go and see the work in its physical form, it can really change your appreciation for how a lot of these are interpreted. That'll be some of the things I mentioned with a couple of the other pieces we look at today as well. What I thought Karen really drew a really good strong point is the expression on the girl's face. That is exactly the first thing that I went to as well. It just couldn't escape the eyes. The little bit of the pout that she has, it's very reminiscent of sort of that young point in a person's life where we feel something's let us down or something isn't as we expect. What seems really, it's not necessarily disturbing, but it has that hint of disturbance, is that she's obviously dressed up for something. It's a costume, but she's amongst this debris. It looks like just strewn litter. And the one little hint, excuse me, that we get that corresponds with her attire, looks like princess attire, is the knocked over sort of princess looking castle. So there's maybe a little bit of, I don't know if you want to say tongue in cheek or dry wit kind of humor with the juxtaposition of those two right there on the curb, where the rest of the debris just kind of technically looks as debris would if it was scattered about. I think tonally this comes across better in the print itself. I think in the gallery, in the digital gallery, there's a little bit more of a higher contrast than what the actual print has. It's a little more tonal. So if you guys are seeing this and from when I'm seeing it, I see there's a lot of really bright spots on her, which, you know, with the lighting doesn't look like that should necessarily be the case, but I think that's just the way the file transposed itself in our gallery. The image itself is beautifully tonal and has a nice, I want to say, sort of textural detail that we can pick out little pieces, because I think there's a little bit of softness that happens in the gallery that we encounter here. But all that being said, for me, I keep wanting to ask her, you know, are you okay? Can I help you, or are you missing something? I feel like I need to be doing something, and that kind of spur to action is also something I found kind of interesting with the work, this particular piece. I don't think we heard from the artist when the awards were being given. And when I tried to look him up, I didn't find a whole lot of extra information and work around the things that he's done. But I still think this one particular piece that Karen did select for third is a great selection. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but I'm not disagreeing with any of the choices. I'm just thinking that's pretty good for third, because the second one, Acorn Leaf, it's right here, by Tim Christensen, and he was actually able to participate in the award ceremony. And I thought that was a really also a great point to this year's exhibition with the online galleries. We were able to have the artists give us a little bit of feedback during the award. So it was almost as if we would have had that on-stage presentation, a little bit of words kind of interaction. So we were just almost getting that same experience. This particular piece for me was especially that mix of science and the arts, because that's exactly what Tim was saying right off the top, simply drawing upon his interest in the science, the chemistry behind this process. To make this image, he was using something called wet plate collodion. If you guys aren't familiar, that's a process that started roughly 1860s. So way back when. It essentially took glass plates that you coated with this collodion liquid. It was a sort of a syrupy, thick, clear, but sticky fluid that you poured onto the glass, rotated it around to get it all nice and coated. Once it was still coated but wet, you had to then get it sensitized with what made it light sensitive, the silver nitrate emulsion. You had to expose that while it was still wet, and that's the term wet plate. Because if you let it dry, the exposure time could have been upwards of, well, several minutes if it would have even registered exposure evenly. You had to do while it was wet. So it's kind of a get it wet, pour it on, sensitize it, get it going process. The whole thing is kind of quick. Exposure time still, of course, not a fraction of a second, but comparatively, that's where this technique is coming from. And I think the print itself, when I saw it, it's rather petite. You can see it's 10 by 8, so it looks like it might have been a contact print of his plate, which is taking whatever he did and sort of made a contact print of that. or maybe scan this in. I couldn't tell by the actual image itself, but that's why you see some of these sort of chemically looking smeary things. Sounds real technical, I know, but that's intrinsic of the process when it's not done to the nth and perfection degree that actually in the 1860s photographers were trying to achieve a real perfection of the image without these, what they would call mistakes, those ins and outs of the fluid chemistry and things not coating exactly evenly. So that this is, in their terms, a flawed image, but in our appreciation, one that adds the process to the interpretation of this huge looking bug, which I'm not quite sure of the scale of it. I know he mentioned he was doing some macro imagery with these. So his proximity to the creature and how he was able to achieve the magnification onto the plate, of course, is more of a technical part on his end, but it certainly throws off the size of this bug. And I'm certainly not a bug fan, but this one is certainly quite interesting. It does feel very specimen-like how it's quite centered. Tonally, the real print's pretty close to what we see on the image here on the screen. I guess it depends on the screen you were looking at, but I think tonally it's a fair representation of what you can get out of that kind of process. Pretty interesting. I think it's a real fascinating point to remember that in 2021, you can combine processes from the early days of photographic industry, the first parts of its invention, the birth of it back in 1839, up to now, and still be able to have photographic imagery. And I think that's a real, I think, exciting point for photographic artists. You have so much to choose from. You know, here Christensen decided to use this love of science and apply this to his work and sort of added the little creative emphasis with the proximity and letting the chemistry do its thing, kind of add that level of appreciation. And this one being second place, I think is a nice choice. Excuse me. So looking at the first place winner that Karen picked for black and white, I think that's down here in our gallery. If I'm panning down correctly, all the way down, there we go. This one here by Sandra Chen Weinstein. She was, all right, view, there we go. The image itself in the gallery is actually pretty close to the tonal range you see here, at least that I'm seeing on my screen. It is a bigger image, of course, and I think this could stand to be quite bigger. I'm thinking if this had a larger presence as a physical print in the frame that it's in, this might have a different kind of encounter. Being only 14 by 15, that's still a pretty good sized print, but I drew myself into it to see it a little bit better. And then I started to see, you know, I just nitpicking, because that's what I do with my students, but nitpicking a little bit on some of the little technical things about it. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to look at this young man. I wanted to see his expression. It's an expression that seems to be a bit of interest in being looked at, a bit of questioning, a sense of, I'm going to go somewhere. I'm not really here to be photographed. I think the incorporation of the American flag behind him and keeping that within the same sort of focus plane, there's not really a sense of distance with how she manipulated the images. It kind of adds a more, I want to say, sort of message kind of image. It wasn't, say, maybe a portrait sort of setup. There is more of an intent to this. And that is something that she did mention during the talk at the award ceremony. And I thought that was interesting. I know Karen picked up on it right away. I know she doesn't see the artist, but she reads title. This one given Black Lives Matter, the title after that group. I think tying this young man into what maybe culture can understand for what Black Lives Matter can mean to everybody. It can certainly take on all sorts of different political directions. And I think that's where this piece peacefully lands. It doesn't seem to have any kind of confrontational immediacy. There's this first encounter with this beautiful face, and it's a young person's face. It happens to be black and white. So it gets rid of that stigma and that sort of overly describing sense that color can give us. And being true to a black and white, it lets the background just exist as I'll say maybe a shadow of the American flag, which can sort of metaphorically represent the shadow of the past and all those kinds of things that can be read into this. I think those are the interesting factors. I think that this particular one from Weinstein is doing really well. I didn't see a lot of other work from her on this theme. I know she said she'd done some other images that were similar. So that would be kind of interesting to kind of compare what other ones would look like in the same idea, maybe the same concept. I think the challenge would be just to kind of maintain that sense of portraying this idea, having the meaning that goes with it without being overtly confrontational to the point of making those divisive things happen, which tends to happen sometimes when you get work that, you know, sticks itself into a political arena. I don't, at least my read wasn't that this was a political work. This was an expressive work that was dealing with those kinds of political things. It wasn't trying to dive into the politics of things. And that's why I was appreciating what Karen was saying about it. And of course, what Sandra was mentioning about doing work along the same lines. So I think this was an excellent choice. Like I said, there were a couple technical things that I was just picking on, but I was doing that for all the work. So those are, I think, really good selections for 1, 2, and 3. I do encourage you guys, though, if you do get a chance, if you haven't yet, go and see the works in person. It does affect your appreciation of them. So I'm going to move on to color. Trying to be a little timely here. So for third place, studio construction. Let's see, where did there we go. I know if you guys remember, I know maybe last year, but the year before, we've seen Florence's work in our gallery before, not our gallery, the Arts Council's gallery. In fact, I know Karen chose 2 of his works when she was the juror in previous form. It was different subject matter, but it was the same sort of technical concept, which does sort of stand, you have to have a level of appreciation for literally it is what it is. That there's not a significant sort of overarching, I think, change of theme that this is asking us to think about. It's really our encounter with the work is the point. It's a 2-dimensional representation of a very 3-dimensional looking image, because he's printed these in that 1-to-1 ratio, the quote life-size ratio. So when we encounter these pieces, these look pretty much exactly to scale. They're not enlarged, they're not made smaller. Of course, he's used enough information in the file to make these prints nice and highly detailed as well. So that helps it render out very nicely when you get close to this. And I was just trying to see all the little creases at the tape and all the little edges and wrinkles of the folded blankets or whatever those things are, the rocks that sort of seem to be shoved into this shelf. And we look like from the back of the shelf is what I feel like I'm looking at. Excuse me. See, I made a couple of notes for myself just to make sure I mention that. He had mentioned that he was looking at the mimic of the real world, which he was referencing the 1-to-1 scale. And I got that right away. I think that's an interesting point if you think about if we saw 10 of these in a row on the wall, even if they were sort of evenly spaced and not right next to each other, they would be re-representing something that he made in his studio. And that's kind of a borrowing of, I don't want to say classic, but the contemporary arts from, probably this late to early 1980s into the mid 90s, when artists were doing a lot of appropriation and then remaking something that was done and calling it their own because maybe they remade those things. This is borrowing a little bit on that. This is something that he made, but then photographed. It was made essentially to be photographed for the purpose of us seeing it the way it is. And that's within that circle of thought that artists are kind of remaking things to be shown in a certain purpose, but shown as a photograph instead of their original state or even their original performance of it. It'd be interesting to see him thinking and putting these together. I think that'd be maybe part of an exhibition he could do at another point. He mentioned something about Talbot's images and how that's reminiscent of his shelf pictures. And I can see how that could, sorry guys, I can see how that could inform him, but I don't think, if you guys are familiar with any of William Henry Fox Talbot, the sort of great grandfather of negative positive photography from England, 1839, his initial shots of its interiors, yeah, he had shelf images, but they weren't quite like what Brian is doing here. But anyway, I could see how that informed him. I just thought that was kind of a reach to make that discussion point, but it was an interesting point that he's being informed from that direction. So feeling a root of photographic history. So I think that's good. I think anytime artists can find a connection to the history of the work that they're practicing in is always much more insightful for us when we're trying to interpret or talk more about the work. Excuse me, guys. So for the second piece, for number 2, that was McCormick Blue. Let's see, where did that go? See, that's the thing. I didn't memorize where they are in the gallery, so I'm going to have to pan up and down to find them, guys. Let's see. Is this? Sorry, where'd my mouse go? There we go. View. So one of the things that McCormick had mentioned when he was talking about the work after Karen presented this for the award of the second place was he called it a look back photograph, or that it contained the elements of photographs that he likes. And he sort of keyed up on a little bit of the atmosphere, the light and dark. Some people call that chiaroscuro, but that's more of a sort of traditional form of work that I think this departs a little bit from. This is maybe a little bit more, at least in my feel, about the drama of the atmosphere with this intense color. Now, this isn't a terrifically large print, but I think this could be a powerfully large print. 15 by 23, that's a good size, but if you think about the kind of sizes we're capable, this could be, I think, kind of a beautiful, really large scale print, 30 by 40 kind of scale. I know that's not exactly the aspect ratio, but that's the kind of thing I think, because of the atmosphere that this piece lets us look at, it could invite us even more so with that style of presence. Now that, of course, is a completely different approach. I think how this is done and sort of the, not small, but a little more intimate size that it was presented in is well enough for our gallery space, excuse me, and for the encountering of it, I think, if you were to have it on your own wall. All that aside, this really reminded me of, there's a contemporary artist, photographer, his name's Todd Hydo. He did a series of nighttime scenes on the outsides of homes and other buildings. They were almost completely vacant of people, except for what the remnants were of their presence, like all the footprints in the sand. There are lights on in this building back here. Is there somebody in there? There's this light here lighting up the parking lot next to that dumpster. So maybe somebody's going to come by after cleaning up the beach and throw away trash. I mean, there's this suggestion that people were there or are going to be there, but they're not there right now. But maybe they are, we just don't see them. And that's one of those kind of ephemeral experiences that we get about these kinds of works that have this sort of lustrous quality of the light and color and the atmosphere that we just get from that experience. And even maybe our own familiarity, at least I know I've got some, with being on the beach and kind of this just before the darkness really gets super dark kind of moments that gives us a remindful sense that we're maybe alone sometimes, but there's still other people out there. I don't know, I was a little bit back and forth about the narrative potential that this could have. I don't know if that was maybe something that he just didn't think about, because there's a lot that you could suggest besides just the simple title of Blue on Blue with the file name. At least that's what that looks like. I think this could be an interesting part of it, maybe a longer body of work that is about this area, or are about these kinds of moments. I know that sounds sort of like what if, but I mean, that's just what I was thinking about when I was hearing him talk about the work. I'm like, oh, there's so much that you could get from this just by looking at it for a long time. That's kind of where I was going with that one. And then for number one, for color, and again, I thought this was interesting from Karen too, because for the black and white number one, there was the piece called Black Lives Matter. And of course, that's a major cultural entity right now in our country, and it has a lot of political movements on the side, and there's lots of work that comes out of those ideas. And here in the color category, the first place winner from Ron Cooper was dealing with a movement kind of not as well known, at least not by me, and I think from some of the other people that were there that day. So I think from number one, it was great that he was able to raise awareness for us, but also bringing these kinds of pieces, these beautiful works into, you could say, the context of a fine art gallery and still have a fit. It doesn't seem out of place. It doesn't read like a poster being framed, yet we're supposed to consider it as the finest art. This reads like a beautiful portrait because it is. The light is really, I want to say, softly even from the front. It's not sort of a dramatic side light. And I think that was a good choice for some of the intentions that Ron was talking about with the work. If you guys weren't there, what Ron was saying is this is the girl's name, Frankie Yellowflower. She's a Native American, and I think she's also, I think he said Pueblo. Let's make sure I say this right. She isn't a senior in high school, so she's a young person. Like the black and white was also a young person. Now she's a little older, at least that we read. But there's this movement that he is doing work with and that Frankie is involved in. Its initials are MMIW, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And oh my gosh, I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I know he had talked a little bit about that there's a lot of this that's also in our northern neighbor, Canada, but also a lot of that in our United States. And we just don't tend to acknowledge that as much. And I think works like this can really, like it did for me, raise eyebrows and go, oh, holy cow, I had no idea. But this is a beautiful image of a beautiful young woman. I think what's, of course, immediately striking for me, before I even knew what Ron was going to say about it, was the red hand on her face and the hint that she just did it. You guys can sort of see the red paint on her fingers there with those brilliantly white fingernails. The splash of red right there. And that, he said, is kind of the emblem or the logo for the movement. Of course, that also reads kind of like tribal paint, or I guess you could say colloquially war paint. But I think the suggestion of that real simple gesture, and then she's confronting us with the arms crossed. You know, it's a very akimbo kind of position, but her expression is not one that's maybe smiling. It's almost kind of confrontational, but there's not a grimace, there's not a grin, and there's not maybe any kind of other emotion except I'm looking at you because you're looking at me. And that sort of asks us to pay attention to other things besides the beautiful qualities of the work. And I think that's what was great about hearing from Ron about this movement and this young lady named Frankie, what she was involved in and why she's in this photograph. I think the print itself seems to be a decent size. I'd say these kind of works, you can always see them really small, you can always see them really big. I thought in the gallery, this was a very comfortable size for it. It didn't need to have to be larger. I thought it was printed very well. I don't know if he did or had it printed for him, but I thought the actual print itself was very nicely done. The detail and all the edging in there, it didn't look like there is, you know, sometimes you get weird JPEG artifacts or something else happens if it's printed by someone else. It looked cleanly done. And I thought that was very key because there are a lot of details, the eyelashes, the eyes, the pieces of paint on her face, the beads on her necklace and on her waist. And that, I think that's a turtle shell. You know, all those little details, there's very few, but they're important because they're part of her. I thought the story was fabulous. It informed me and certainly made me more aware of something. And I think be interesting to hear what Ron does more with that group. And again, that was the first place winner in color. So our challenging category, 3D multidimensional, we've called it experimental. We've had different titles for this, trying to gather and get different works. This year, Karen picked the winner, Rihanna Gardner. It was this piece. And actually, when I saw this piece in the gallery, I honestly didn't recognize it. I know Julie had told me what it was, so I was looking forward to seeing it, but I went in there and I just got distracted with all the work on the walls and the columns, and then I saw this piece on the corner, and then when I came around, I'm like, oh, that's what that is. It's a lot smaller. I mean, you can read the size, 3¼ by 3¼ Those blocks, they're almost diminutive. And I think that's kind of an interesting twist on what the suggestion of the figure pose is, because right there with the blocks in place, you can see that the figure tends to look, it doesn't seem to be clothed. It looks to be a little bit posed in a way that's not quite comfortable, or maybe it's leaning to the side. The light is very dramatic, so it looks very contrasty. The red tint isn't quite even. It looks a bit of a stain. So the suggestion of a red stain kind of leans on other things. And this was a piece that also kind of dealt with some political topics, maybe not in the left or right kind of side, just more about women and their bodies, because the pieces do not touch without consent. And there's a lot of, there's no yes without consent. If you don't have consent, you can't go any farther. I mean, there's of course different phrases for that. I'm just not getting it right. But I think the encountering of this piece and sort of the weight of the message that it can take with it, it's a little bit off-putting. I want to play with the blocks, but then I don't, because I don't want to mess up the message. Or I know she said you were allowed to, that you could, but I didn't want to after I considered what the kind of weight of this message means. I didn't know that it would have consent to move the blocks. But then if I take that further as metaphor, would I have consent to touch that person's image of their body? I mean, there's some of those questions that I'm like, I'm not going to move this, one, because its sign doesn't say that I can, but two, part of the message, I think, makes me not want to, because I don't have consent. And well, there wasn't anybody to ask, or at least the artist wasn't there at the time. Certainly she did say that the pieces were meant to be kinetic, that you can move them around. You could probably reorient it so that leg there might be on the bottom. I don't know if you messed up the pieces like a Rubik's Cube, if that would kind of mess up the message, because you lose the line and connecting arm and the figures. But I don't know, this piece challenged me more than I thought. One, because I didn't recognize it right away, so it kind of felt silly. And then two, when I did recognize it, I was sort of pausing for a moment. I wasn't sure if I could touch, if I was allowed to. I don't know. It was because of the child blocks. It has that little bit of a juxtaposition of child's toy, but a very adult message. And that's where I was like, I don't know. I can't play with it, but I know you're probably supposed to, but I don't feel like I can. And I think that's an interesting challenge for art, to be able to have us ask questions like that about itself and also its message. So I thought this was an interesting choice. And I think this category is starting to get some good work in there. I know in the past we've got work that was just beautiful and interesting, but maybe didn't have as much of a message. And I think this year we're seeing work where artists are tackling some bigger messages, some bigger ideas. And I think this piece is doing that, which is, I think, interesting and powerful, even though it's a very small piece. So that was that one. And then our final category that Karen awarded was Best of Show. This, I think he's at the top, right? Yeah. He actually, they're right next to each other. There's this one here, but this one that she selected for Best of Show, Teatro Comparo, or okay, I'm not saying it correctly, Compamor, number 9. By Charles Anselmo. And he was there at the award ceremony, and he gave a little bit of background to the piece, which was interesting. I think the piece itself does render it a very satisfying encounter. I think sometimes when works you see on the screen, you don't get as much in the detail, but when you do get to see the piece in person, all the little cracks and edges and leaves and everything, it's satisfying, it's there. So that's what's great about the piece too. It doesn't kind of lose its detail, because that's what this is all about for me. Not knowing any of the story when I first saw it, when I was looking at this work, and then the other one that Charles had in the gallery, it was all about those little bits of detail in every little corner and every little structure that he so perfectly composed in his viewfinder. You had mentioned the time it took him to try to get access to some of these spaces. This is a space that's in Cuba, and he said he'd been trying to get into here for, what was it, like 10 years or 15 years. He'd been trying to get in to this space just to get photographs, just to make work about the inside of this place. And that alone is kind of an interesting little behind the scenes. But I think because of the architectural sort of history involved with this piece or this structure in Cuba, as well as his experience of just the 15 years trying to get to it, it all kind of builds and adds up to this moment for him. And for us, we see the benefit of his patience. I think the subtlety of color with, I don't know what causes all those streaks on the concrete, but it's certainly some kind of weathering and moisture and buildup of things, just makes it seem that much heavier of time passing. And then life still takes over. The earth and Mother Nature come back. Doesn't matter what we build or make, it's going to go away, and eventually the earth will take it back. And I think that's what this one certainly brings me back to, is that kind of notion. I don't know if that was something that Charles was really going into it with, but for me, that's what I was coming out of it with. No matter what's happening, no matter how old sometimes things seem to go or get, Mother Nature, it's going to eventually take it back, because that's the way it goes. And it's the subtlety of color again that I also really liked about this piece. The greens that just kind of intermix with those warm tones of the stain in the concrete, and I guess the brick in there too. There's all sorts of little pieces of things that are just around. And the one little pop of blue from whatever that is down there in the corner, a little bit of a relief. But that's just kind of the run through of the winners that Karen had picked. And I think there's just a lot of, like, this is the other work that Charles had submitted. And, you know, again, it was all about the detail for me. I just kept seeing all those little pieces of things. I assume this is again from Cuba, because it says La Habana. So, you know, just detritus and pieces of little things everywhere, all this little detail, but so carefully composed in his viewfinder that we still have a sense of some kind of symmetry, some kind of balance, just like what he had structured on his Best of Show winner. So, you know, I thought that was an interesting connection in the works, even though they were kind of very different subject matter. So that's kind of where I was. And I think at this point, I know I'm not quite, maybe halfway through, I suppose, but do you guys have questions for me?
Robert, I have one in the chat box, and then if you have a question, please feel free to add it in. So here's one for you, Robert. And this person is asking, going back to the third place color, so the piece by Brian Florentine with the bookshelf, says, how does the remaking of something you referred to in the third place color photo differ from staging a piece, which is what it seems like in the third place black and white image, which is the little girl in the princess dress? Does photography that remakes something question the authenticity of the original subject?
Good question. And it's kind of a two-parter. So the remaking of it, what I was meaning is he's remaking the encounter for us in the gallery. Now, of course, he's got the initial thing that he made, and he's not remaking that entire thing. But certainly he was talking about how he constructed these in his studio to then be photographed. So we're seeing kind of the remake version, but photographically. I think that maybe that gets to the answer, but I think that the dialogue, of course, would be interesting if we could go back and forth, but the authenticity of things, that's not just this, that's all art. I think if you call the question authenticity of artwork, I mean, you can go to, gosh, artists like Jeffrey Koons, who has a factory make his works, and the works are these crazy balloon structures, but they're not balloons. They're actually cast aluminum, but painted to look like balloons, but he doesn't make them. His factory makes them. You know, where's the authenticity? I mean, that's a question that artists have dealt with probably since they had apprentices working for them. I mean, that's the difficulty of art conservators as well, is when they know a piece is attributed to an artist, trying to find out the house that the attribution goes to is even a difficult research project. But once they do get to that, then just attributing it to the master isn't quite historically accurate. So that's why authenticity sometimes just goes simply by, well, who made it? But as far as authenticity to a piece of work that you make a certain way, yet you are showing it another way, I think you're still, again, sort of trying to push that boundary of defining what art could be, as far as the authenticity of, I made this, but I'm showing you it this way. I don't know, maybe I went on a bit of a tangent on that one. I don't know, but does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah, thank you. We have another one for you, and this one is going back to the piece that won the first place award in the black and white. So the Black Lives Matter, the young boy in the overalls. The question is, what did you think of the word liberty on the jeans of the young child in this photo?
Honestly, I just knew that was a label for the overalls. At least that's how it read in the actual photograph. I think keeping it in there as far as having it make a connotation about liberty, free will, those kind of pursuits of happiness that we understand the Constitution guarantees all people. I'm certain that could be a connection that's made, but I didn't think it distracted. And for me, it really just read as part of his wardrobe. It didn't kind of stand out as like a name tag would or anything else, but especially in the print, for me, it read just more as part of his wardrobe. I do see though, but when I see it on the screen, it does kind of stand out a little bit more. I think maybe partially because it has a bit of a more of a flattening effect on the screen than it does on the print. But I didn't really take it much farther than that. But it is an interesting point. I mean, the idea of liberty, and he's standing in front of the American flag with who he is and where we are culturally, certain that could be part of the message. That's a good point.
So I don't have any other questions yet. So if you have one, please feel free. Or Robert, if you want to open it up to other comments, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I know a lot of times people ask me, so, you talk about the winners, but if you were to pick like the ones you like, if you were to pick a winner, what would you pick? Well, I don't want to pick winners. I just want to talk about others that I liked that Karen didn't mention, which of course, that's like, second backseat driver, armchair quarterbacking, whatever you want to call it. But, that's I think an interesting point that we can do when we have this gallery talk is also talk about the really awesome work that's still in the gallery that we're just not talking about for lack of words. One of them that I liked was, where did that, and it's right here. It's called Metrobride, and it's actually a classic black and white print. He made this, Jim made it from traditional 35 millimeter black and white film. That had nothing to do with my appreciation of it, but I thought that was interesting, different media happening in our show. Jim's done what he called like street photography. That's kind of his operation. The way he likes to use photography is just being out and doing that style of work. And this was one. What I really liked about this was the simple geometry of the space. It seems very almost vernacular in a way where it seems sort of snapshot, but there's a real intention to how the space is laid out, where he was and standing and not sitting. The observance of this couple here, looking at the bridal couple kissing, it's all about that with the nonchalant person in the background who has no idea or doesn't even care. This Metrobride, I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of look at a contemporary life happening now. Are they on their way? Are they on their way back? Are they just doing it right there? You just don't know. And I thought those kind of questions were ones that I liked about this little brief moment. There's another one that, yeah, this one at the very top that you guys used for the gallery right up there. It's by Charles Dozer. And I'm not a huge fan of just traditional still life photographs. No, I am a fan of the paintings, but that's where this one took me. I immediately went to say, oh, I think of like Vermeer and some of those paintings where the light's coming in from the window. He's got one of his ladies there doing something, but then you have all these fruits and objects on tables that are lit just so elegantly. I mean, there's an elegance, and it's in the print too. If you guys get a chance to see the print, it's represented well here. The tones of the color, the light is just elegant falling across these fruit. The title's just kind of, I think, nonchalant. Then there was an apple. So it kind of adds a little bit of humor to it. But for me, it's just this little beautiful setup. And then I just looked at it for a lot longer than I thought I would, being a still life. I get nothing against still lives, but I'm like, oh, it's fruit, but it's so beautiful. But it kept reminding me about those classical still lifes from years gone by of paintings that are showing this work and with an emphasis on the form, the shadows, the highlights, the way the fruit exists on its own, knowing that it's supposed to look a certain way when it's beautifully lit, and we've got that. So I thought this one was, for me at least, brought me back to kind of my love of classical paintings, even though it's a straightforward photograph. Just really, really well done, even if in a simple still life that it was. This one here, I also liked right next, Emily Fisher's piece. There we go, it wasn't wanting to click for me. It's just so simple. It almost seems like there's something I don't know. She calls it Through the Other Side, and literally you can see through the other side because that window or whatever opening that used to be on the right side of the door is open all the way through. But I think it's also suggesting that this figure is going to go through the other side. What is on the other side? Doesn't look like there's anything there, but obviously there's some point and reason to this figure going that direction. It's the little simple action of that and this bleak kind of sparse feel. I don't know if you guys know the artist Andrew Wyeth, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of some of his sort of dry grass landscapes, and then there's one little figure in there, or one little house. I mean, it very much connects me to his work at the same time as the concept of this suggested narrative. I'm keep going to like the questions. What is that person doing? Why are they there? Why is this house in the middle of nowhere? It kind of looks like a schoolhouse. Maybe it was a church and the steeple's been torn off. Who knows? I mean, all those questions. I just thought this one was so bleak. I was like, what is going on? Why is this here? What is going on? And just it made me ask those kind of questions. She's got a lot of other work with sort of similar compositions and a very sparse approach. It's almost frugal in its composition, if that's an appropriate word for this, because there's just enough there that you sort of know where you land, but it seems almost surreal. So yeah, this one I thought was interesting. It just kind of made me look at it for a long while. Any questions yet? Any more?
Nope, I don't have any yet.
All right, let's see. I got a couple more that I did spend some time looking at. Where did that one go? I wrote a bunch of notes, guys. I'm sorry if my head's in your camera right now. Let's see, that one was there. Nope, is it down this way? I didn't memorize where all these things are. Oh my gosh, you guys have to go see this one. Now, compositionally, I'm not the greatest fan of this, but what really bothers me about this one, if you notice where the shadows are falling, they're all over the place. So obviously this has been manipulated in some way, but it's been done in such a way that I didn't recognize it right off the bat. I mean, the shadows these columns are casting are right behind them, yet there's sun falling up here. The shadows that these guys are casting is right here because the light's hitting them, yet there's a shadow here from some unknown source. There is a shadow hitting this wall that's being cast by not anything. This area doesn't seem to be lit from the same direction that the sun is falling on the columns. It's the same intensity of light, and I think that's what fooled me right off the bat. But all these different directions, it frustrated me. And I kind of like that. I was like, holy cow, this convinced me about something, and then I got frustrated about it. So I don't know if you guys saw this piece or what was done to manipulate it. It's probably not a huge amount of manipulation, but I think it's just enough, or maybe it was, but it was just enough, like I said, it frustrated me in a good way. All right, it didn't make me mad. I was just like, oh, that's going this way and that's going that way. So then where's the sun? Where's the it made me question it. And I like that. I thought that was kind of fun and frustrating at the same time. There was one, I think it's at the top here, another black and white that, well, this was another one too. This isn't the one I was thinking of, but this one I liked because also it made me just look at it for a while. The keys right there. Why are there keys right there next to this abandoned looking kitchen sink? Obviously the glass has fallen in from somebody maybe vandalizing this, what looks to be an abandoned structure, but the jar with the little, what looks like maybe Christmas decorations, I mean, there was some stuff left behind, and it's called Traces. This is my Margaret Klingen, I believe is her last name. I just thought the color palette on this, the print looks pretty good. I mean, the colors look satisfying and they're just subtle enough. So obviously when you guys make choices on printing, you've got such variety, but I think it's just subtle enough, subdued enough that it gives the mood of the piece being a little melancholy, but not sort of overtly bleak and sad. It doesn't hit you over the head with that. It's just got the hint of those things. And I think that suggestion, just because of the color, as well as all the detail, her use of the subtle diagonal there, a nice intro into the composition. It really just kind of made me look at it for a while. And I thought that was a piece that wasn't making me happy, but it made me think about those kind of moments or places I know that I recognize this kind of feeling with. I think it could be an interesting black and white as well because of all the little textures and details, but I do love the subtlety of her color on that one.
Robert, this one is really interesting to me because, and I wanted to ask you about this, the one of Margaret Klingen that you just showed in the gallery, it almost looks like a painting. It just has such a soft quality to it. And of all the shows that we've ever done, I think for me this year, there was such a contrast between what they look like digitally and what they look like in person. I've never seen such a stark contrast between that. And any ideas or thoughts on that?
It's certainly the difference between the physical work and the digital representation of it. And you guys all know that you look at something on a screen in one location and a screen on another, and the colors and contrast could be very different. So that's just I think a challenge for us contemporarily, but I think that seeing the difference between this image here on my screen and remembering the print, for me, like you said, Julie, that the print itself it reminded me more of a painting, but for me, it was about the subtlety of the color. And I think that's maybe more of what a painting can give you. Is just there could be a lot of color in there, but it's just subtle enough that the layering of it brings the light out to us. So we recognize that it's about the line, about the detail, about the mood, but it's also the subtlety of the color. And yeah, I don't know if maybe, along the future lines, things will have a better representation between the physical and the digital, or if we're just going to have to accept that for the time being. I mean, certainly that we do, but I don't think it's a sacrifice. I don't think we miss a whole lot. Of course, it's just a different experience. I think you just have to appreciate it in different ways. Certainly
Yeah.
if you don't,
Yeah,
if you
for
don't
sure. I
have-
definitely don't think it's bad, but it's the first time I've really noticed such a distinct difference between the gallery walls and the digital gallery. It just stuck out to me. I did receive a question while you have this one up.
Okay.
Someone asked, Robert, how did the artist or the photographer in that case create the painterly effect?
How did they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my guess might be that if they were in Photoshop, they might have had some layers of texture. I know there was a piece in the gallery where they had printed on like silver leaf and something, so you could sort of physically see that. But sometimes when artists are just working in the digital space, it could just be a matter of working through transparency of layers, and some layers have a more interference of texture with the original photograph, or even just a tint of a hue that will alter the effect of a certain area instead of all across the entire image. I mean, that's some of the beauties and sort of intricacies that we get to choose from when we work that way. But it can also be a bit of a loophole in the fact that you get stuck working on something and you think you got it. And then once you think you got it, everything else looks awful because you've concentrated so much on just this singular part or this singular effect. I've done it. I've seen students do it. I know I've talked to some other folks that's happened to, just in different ways. But exactly how we should, see what Margaret might say if she had a certain approach, a certain technique. I mean, I've always told my students, there's no secrets as to how we do things, guys. I mean, there really shouldn't be, because there's so much out there available. It's really the why you chose to do those things. And that's where we can get into the discussion and the fascination and all those other appreciations for the creative process. Because the toolbox is pretty much out there for everybody to pick from. It's just why you chose the particular tool you did. So yeah, I don't know. It could be those layers of transparency, or maybe she had something else that she was using. So there was one more black and white that
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, if anyone else has a question, please feel free to share it.
Yeah, it was this one. It's a self-portrait in Joe's room. To me, it was familiar because I've seen a lot of student work in their apartments, in their dorms, and they just kind of look as they are, and it's their own space. But what drew me to this one was the gesture of the figure on this kind of unkept, well, it's not unkept, but kind of undressed bed. So this empty space that reads kind of well lit, almost studio-like. It was a bit of a juxtaposition for me in that case. It felt staged, but then it also felt a little intimate because of the way the figure is sort of leaning to the side. There's a bit of a gesture there with some intention. I thought that was a lovely angle for the leg to hang off with the foot there. The way the light just strikes the lower back to kind of accentuate going up to the shoulders. It reads very much sculptural. It reminded me just a little bit about the thinker with the guy that's leaning over with his arms on his lap. Just that kind of simple gesture is familiar. And so I connected with that, but the staging of it and this sort of beautiful lighting from the windows, it's a simple kind of composition that just makes you kind of feel satisfied. And that it's a self-portrait, I didn't know that until I saw the title. I was like, oh, so then when I was looking at it again, I'm thinking, all right, she's in a specific place because she mentions that in the title. It's a self-portrait, so that's actually the artist in the image. So I'm kind of trying to get these different levels of information from it. So I thought this one was one that was interesting. And I don't know about worthwhile, maybe Karen's kind of awarding, but certainly it's one that drew my attention and made me ask some questions as I was looking at the rest of the show. And there is a lot of really great work, you guys. I know we got some work in here from committee members, and I think y'all know I like your work. So I'm not ignoring your work. I'm just mentioning other work in this show because I know you guys do really, really fabulous work. So we're getting kind of close to the 6 o'clock hour mark. We got any other questions out there, guys?
Robert, I have an observation. I'd be curious to get your reaction and from our other participants, their reactions as well. Photographers are often encouraged to have people in their photographs to provide some human interest and some scale and so forth. Two of the images that we've talked about tonight, the Emily Fisher's Through the Other Side, which you talked about. But I have to say that in that particular image, I looked at it hard and fast and decided that I would have liked it better without the person in the orange vest. And as a comparison, our best of show were the theater in Cuba. It took me a long time to figure out the scale on that photograph. It was more effective to me in person than digitally. And I thought, boy, to show the scale of this place, it sure would have been nice to have something, a human element or something to show us how huge this stage really is. And I guess those are boxes on the side. Without that human presence or without that scale, I think to me, the picture wasn't as strong as I had hoped it to be. So anybody else get those kind of feelings?
No, Martin, I think it's a very astute observation, because certainly scale is such a big issue when it comes to especially images like this that are about the size of the space as well as the state that it's in. What Julie was talking about earlier about actually seeing work in person versus seeing it on the screen, this one does read very different as far as understanding scale. You see this print on the wall, 25 by 29. It's not terribly small. And you get a sense that it's about a big space just because it's kind of a bigger print. And you can kind of step back, maybe angle yourself differently. It's just a different experience encountering that sense of scale. Funny thing is, have you guys seen architectural renderings and stuff? I know the university I work for, they're putting up a new building and they've got these architectural renderings and you have little people in there to kind of give you a sense of scale so you know how big a building is. Architects and engineers, they call those scalies. They put them in there to represent scale, and you can dress them, make them do different things. They're like little characters and figurines. And knowing that that's out there, I have a colleague who uses that software to make photographs with. He, just like what you mentioned, he would have maybe taken that piece I was talking about from Emily, and he would have put in maybe the guy with the orange vest and maybe someone else holding the person's hand. I mean, he does that just for fun, but it also makes some kind of really interesting points about, do you actually need people to photograph anymore if you can kind of put them in there and make them do whatever you want to a point. So I think that's a real interesting point when you think about trying to get a sense of scale in a human way.
Robert, I have another question for you, a couple here. Someone says, I also was really impressed by a lot of the black and white work in the competition, but you seem to be a little less impressed by the color landscape work. Is there a reason for that?
Less impressed with the color landscape work. I don't know. I hadn't realized that. I think there's really beautiful landscapes like this one here with the sunset in Maine. You guys tried to photograph the moon when it's out and you get different gradients with the sky. It's not as easy as it is to just kind of simply angle the camera and push the button. There's a lot of consideration for where the lens focuses and how much ISO you might push or not if you're working digitally. There's a careful balance technically to get something to do that. But I think the beauty part is this gradient, this almost lusciously breathing warmth red that bleeds directly into the line of the blue. It's like a painting from Rothko where he's got the blue on the top and the darker shade in the middle with another color underneath. That's where this one was kind of taking me. There was that at the top? Where is yours, Martin? It's the one that's upside down, right? Oh, there's that one there. Martin put one in here. I'm just skimming over it. Sorry. That is, it's actually, yeah, it's right here. This is, I guess you wouldn't say it's landscape, but it's landscape. And actually, when I was looking at this, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how am I seeing this? And when I was angling myself to see composition a little bit differently, it looks like maybe it's, oriented upside down for a reason to kind of make the upper part of the image more about the appreciation of the scene and not being at the edge of this body of water. We're actually looking up at the water. And I thought just that simple idea of sort of reorienting the photograph in a way, whether it happened or not during the process, but I like that idea. I thought reorientation is such a prerogative of the artist that sometimes we forget about it. And I think that the simple nature of, sort of taking it from the edge of the body of water, but then turning it so it looks like we're looking up. I thought that was nice. And it really did make this look painterly in a way because of the way the water gives us that detail edge of ripple and effect of some reflective depth with what's on the surface of it. I thought this was a nice print, Martin. And this was the one here that someone had asked about texture. This is the one that's on that silver leaf. You can kind of see it a little bit on the edge here. And I'm not sure the actual process and how this works because it says this is an archival pigment. And then the description said it was like on leaf or something like that. And I've seen other people print on leafed paper, but I don't know how with other printers, technically all that, but the subtlety of the color on this one is almost to the point of desaturation. There's just some little pips of warmth. It's sort of dominantly moody with the hues as far as giving a bit of a sense of melancholy. Compositionally, I'm a little bit too centered for my likes. Traditionally, I like things maybe not quite so centered as this one. I just kind of land here and stop. But it's the color on this one and that subtlety of the texture that I thought really, I spent some time looking at that one. I really wasn't intending to skip over landscapes.
I have another question, and it's about a specific piece by Michael Hunter Thompson. I'm not sure where it is in the gallery, but if you could look for that. Right, someone asked if the artist himself could make a comment or two about the work, this particular.
What you got to say, Michael?
It's Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Here we can. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. I don't know specifically what's asked, but I mean, I can walk you through it real quick. That big graffiti piece that's on the background wall of the support of the bridge. I know the artist that did that, and I've always been, kind of fascinated by that piece. So what I did was, I know the guy, so I had him be part of the image. So I staged a photograph there at dusk, right before nightfall, and the guy who actually did the graffiti, like the monster head in the background, he's the one that's kind of like looking on to what looks to be another graffiti artist with a ladder. And so we got some props. We it's these photographs that I do are kind of like an adventure, because this one actually a train was in the way for most of the time that we were there. And I actually had my mom there, who's an art teacher, and very aggressive. She does not mess around. And she went right up to like the conductor or whatever, was like, can you back up the train like 30 feet real quick so we can try to do this before it gets too dark? And yeah, so you know, these things, there was probably 15 people there. So I had my daughter there. Like I said, they're always an adventure. So that's my buddy in the background. I have him in like a respirator. So it's all thought through, and probably thought about the thing for like a year before I went there to actually try to pull it off. And yeah, that's about it, I guess.
Yeah, this is one of Michael's pieces. I think if you guys get a chance to see more of Michael's work, it has this sort of paused moment of narrative. There's this buildup of maybe a scene where there's maybe something happening and not happening. If you're familiar with artists like, say, Gregory Christensen or Julie Blackmoon, it's kind of in the same vein. But I think because Michael's able to work and do this, even with what's available and locally, that's really what grounds it for us here. And I've always thought the kind of work you've been doing is at one, the adventure, which I think is great, and at two, it's still original. It's got its own difference and its own stories and connections that you're looking at. And I thought that was another good piece to have in the show, Mr. Thompson.
Thanks, Robert. Hey, real quick, I should say that that the artist that painted the monster head, he also painted his jacket. You can see he's wearing like a blazer. If you see it in person, it's big enough where you can pick that up. But yeah, it ended up being like very difficult to pick him out. He was so camouflaged against that other graffiti, like that other just random graffiti where it says "Crybaby" in there. So I had to take a lot of the graffiti out around him just so he'd pop out more, which was a total nightmare. But I think, you know, it made it a little bit more successful of a composition.
Yeah, this is one of those pieces that in the digital gallery does tend to get kind of soft in resolution. And if you see the print in person, nice big 32 by 40, it's highly edged in detail, and you can see the near to far. It's a nice crisp image in person. So I do encourage you guys to go check it out and check out Mr. Thompson's work in other places too.
So we have just a few minutes left tonight. I want to just remind everyone, if you have not come in to see the show, it is available and up through next Saturday. So time is getting short. We also have the People's Choice Award contest going on right now. So if you have not made a vote for that, you can do it by either coming into the gallery and placing your vote, or if you're from somewhere else, you can just send a message to our Facebook page at Allegany Arts Council with just the title and the artist that you want to vote for, and we'll tabulate all of those. Just wanted to open it up. Does anyone else have a comment or question? If you would like to say something, please just feel free to unmute yourself and jump right on in. I got a comment here. I know that we have a few folks on tonight. There are several of you that I recognize that have work in the show. So I just want to give you all, I know Raphael Warshaw, you were on, Brandon Hurt, you are on, Sandra, any of the artists that have work in the show that are on the call, if you'd like to say something about your piece or someone else's, we would welcome you to do that as well.
Well, I have to say this year, it's another really awesome show. I think, you know, our juror did a really good job selecting pieces, but I think from what's been gathered for the exhibits, in person especially, but even here seeing it on the digital gallery, it's a really excellent exhibition. It really covers so much of what's happening contemporarily in photographic arts, all the different styles, all the different themes, and especially a lot of different media that people are using to get to their finished work. It's just a really welcome bastion of the fine art of photography that's happening right now. So congrats to everybody.
I'd be happy to say something about mine. My name is Jeanette Darnauer. I'm from Colorado, and this is my first time in the Allegany show. I felt very honored because I'd never, that's the first national show that I've been invited to join. I haven't submitted very many at all, so it was quite an honor for me. My piece is called Lily Pond Reflection. It's one of the color close-up images. And I guess all I'd say about it, and then I'd love your thoughts on it, Robert, is I was so impressed with, I love nature close-ups. I love being able to explore the lines, the shadows, the textures, the way that we see nature that we don't often look at unless we're kneeling down or looking closely or really paying attention if we're on a hike, which is what this happened to be. A lot of times mine are super, macro shots because I love looking in the inside of nature. But I was impressed with this one just because of the timing and the light and the shadows and the depth. So it was not a complex work, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time, I think. And I'd love anybody else's thoughts on it and advice if there's something that could make it stand out even stronger.
Well, Jeanette, I don't know about standing out any stronger. I think that's usually a best case discussed when we're looking at work in person. But for me, you were kind of spot on about the way that the depth is with the reflection and what we see through the reflection. There were a couple of other pieces that had those similar qualities in the show. And I think that was something I think Karen picked up on in some of the different landscapes and different scenes that had that. It does create certain difference of texture and geometry that's not physically there. It's something that happens because of that phenomenon. And that's what's so beautiful and interesting about finding those scenes. And I think, sometimes we don't always give ourselves the recognition of making good work just because one didn't take very long, or two, I just happened to be there, when in fact that's the nature of how photography is. It is a little bit at times chance. And if you don't always have the chance, then sometimes you have to make it. But a lot of times it could just be that chance, that moment. And that's what can make good photographers great photographers, is they're able to kind of somehow get all those right chances or those right moments. Even in their inconsistency, there's some kind of consistency. And I know that sounds very contradictory, but that there are artists that work that way. But this is one that, I do like. The area up in here is what I kept going to, the cloud reflections and the transparency between what's under the water and the lilies right on top. That's where my eye was drawn to mostly. So yeah, this was a nice one.
And Jeanette, your piece is one in particular that I thought was very interesting because, correct me if I'm mistaken, but is it printed on a wood panel?
Yes, it is.
Or is it a resin product?
No, it's on a wood
So
panel.
it has a very three-dimensional. So it has a very, three-dimensional feel in person, and it also has a very kind of painter-like quality almost in some ways. So this one feels very different in the gallery than it does on the screen, I think.
Thank you.
That's
That's one of the purposes of that type of framing, so to speak. That dimensional, three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
That's just another one that we can chalk up to looking very different in person.
Good. Well, unfortunately, I can't be there. I'm in Colorado. So sometime, maybe next year.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you. Anybody else have a comment before we sign off for the evening? Okay. Well, Robert, I want to thank you as always for spending a lot of time with the images and sharing your insights with us. It's always fun to go down the rabbit hole a little bit and talk in more depth about the show. And just once again, want to congratulate all the artists who were invited into this year's class. And thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for supporting the photography events. I know our photography committee works very hard to put these events and activities together that last all year long. So please continue to support their work, and congratulations to all of you. So just 7 more days to see the show. So spend a few minutes with it. And thanks again for joining us tonight. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Good job.